During our wedding rehearsal, my fiancée's ex walked in and kissed her in front of everyone. What happened next stunned the room. When I look back on that night, I still remember how perfect everything seemed right before it all went off the rails. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a smooth run-through of what would be the happiest day of my life. The venue was stunning. A large banquet hall with vaulted ceilings, chandeliers glowing faintly gold, long tables dressed in ivory linens, and the faint sound of piano music echoing through the corners. Both families were gathered, awkwardly polite with each other, smiling too much, as if they knew this was practice for the real performance. I was nervous, of course. My hands were clammy, my heart pacing faster than it should have been, but I kept telling myself that was normal. Every groom gets a little jittery before the big day. Lila looked beautiful even in something casual, moving between groups of relatives, smoothing things over when small tensions flared. My best man Daniel nudged me at one point and whispered that I was the luckiest guy in the room. I believed him. The officiant called everyone to order so we could walk through the ceremony. I stood near the altar as the bridal party lined up. Bridesmaids giggled nervously, groomsmen shuffled their feet. Everything was textbook rehearsal, until the double doors at the far end of the hall creaked open. At first, nobody paid attention. A late guest, maybe. A vendor checking in. But then the man walked in with a kind of confidence that didn't belong in that room. He was tall, sharp-dressed, carrying himself like someone who wasn't lost or confused. My stomach dropped even before I understood why. I didn't recognize him personally, but I could read Lila's reaction from across the hall. Her shoulders stiffened. Her smile faltered. Her eyes widened like she'd just seen a ghost. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight toward her. People turned, murmurs rippling through the rows of chairs. I watched her glance at me, then back at him, frozen in place. And then, before anyone could stop it, he leaned in and kissed her. Not a quick, mistaken brush. A full kiss, in front of every single person we had invited. The sound in the room changed instantly. Gasps, a few sharp laughs from people who thought it was some kind of prank, and then dead silence. I felt my chest seize up, but not in the way people expect. I didn't explode. I didn't throw a punch. I just stood there, staring, my entire body locked down while the world around me scrambled to figure out what they had just seen. Her maid of honor, Vanessa, rushed forward and pulled Lila back. Daniel, my best man, muttered something under his breath and stepped closer to me, like he was bracing for me to swing. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father muttered that this was a disgrace. Lila didn't immediately push the guy away. That was what burned itself into my brain. She hesitated. She looked at him with this mixture of shock and something else, something I couldn't quite name. Relief? Guilt? Recognition? Whatever it was, she didn't shove him until a few long seconds had passed. The man finally stepped back, scanning the room with a smug sort of grin, like he wanted every single person to witness what he'd just done. Nobody had to tell me who he was. I didn't need an introduction. That was Corey, the ex she had always described as a mistake from her past, someone who had been toxic and long gone. The same ex she swore she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone was frozen, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to yell, to storm out, to collapse. I didn't. My face was stone, my eyes locked on hers. She opened her mouth, probably to spin some story, but I lifted my hand just slightly, signaling her not to speak. Not here. Not now. The officiant stammered, asking if everything was all right. Guests started whispering. One of her uncles cursed under his breath. The tension was unbearable. I forced myself to stay calm, though inside my head thoughts were firing off like a dozen alarms at once. Why had he shown up? How did he know the time and place? And why hadn't she fought him off immediately? Eventually, Corey was escorted out by venue staff, though he didn't resist. He looked almost proud as they dragged him away. The room didn't settle. People kept talking, buzzing with theories. Some guests looked at me with pity, others with barely hidden curiosity. I could feel their eyes crawling over me, trying to see if I would break. The rehearsal tried to resume, but the mood was gone. The officiant stumbled through the lines. Bridesmaids kept stealing glances at Lila, and Daniel whispered that I didn't have to go through with anything if I didn't want to. I stayed silent. Silence became my armor. Instead of confronting her in front of everyone, I pulled my focus inward. I watched everything. Every nervous fidget from Vanessa. Every sideways glance between her bridesmaids. Every time Lila tried to laugh off the tension and failed. It wasn't just embarrassment on her face. It was something deeper. After the rehearsal, families scattered in awkward clumps. My parents insisted I come home with them, that we figure things out. I told them no. I needed space. Lila tried to follow me, tried to pull me aside, but I slipped away. The last image I had of her that night was her standing near the doors, pale, biting her lip, surrounded by bridesmaids who looked just as rattled as she did. Alone in my car, I sat in the dark and replayed every detail. The kiss itself was shocking, but it was the small things that stuck out to me. The way Corey walked in like he belonged there. The way Lila froze instead of recoiling instantly. The way Vanessa looked more furious with Corey than surprised, like she'd been dreading this exact moment. I started to realize this wasn't a random ambush. He hadn't just wandered in off the street. He knew the time, the place, the audience. Someone had told him. And Lila's reaction wasn't of someone blindsided. It was of someone who'd been caught. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell or throw things. I wasn't going to storm around demanding answers. If I wanted the truth, I had to find it myself. And if there was more beneath the surface, and I already knew there was, I'd uncover it before the wedding day. By the time I finally pulled out of the parking lot, I wasn't just a groom anymore. I was an investigator. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Corey barging into the hall, kissing Lila like he owned her, and the look on her face, paralyzed, guilty, exposed. My friends told me to call off the wedding immediately, but I couldn't. Not yet. I didn't want to make a decision out of pure rage. I wanted facts. The first question burned hotter than the kiss itself. How did Corey know about the rehearsal? This wasn't an open event. The only people with details were close family, bridal party, and venue staff. Someone fed him the schedule. The next morning, I started piecing it together. I checked our wedding website. Password protected. No way he could have accessed it unless someone gave him the code. I logged into the shared guest list. No edits in weeks. That narrowed it to either a direct tip or someone at the venue. I drove back to the banquet hall under the excuse of needing to finalize music cues. I pulled aside the event coordinator, a sharp woman who didn't miss much. When I casually asked if anyone had come by asking about the rehearsal earlier in the week, her brow furrowed. She remembered a man, tall, dark hair, confident, who'd stopped at the front desk asking about the schedule. He claimed he was related to the bride. She admitted she had brushed him off at first, but later noticed him again near the catering area, listening. That confirmed it. Corey hadn't just shown up randomly. He had been snooping, which meant he knew exactly where to be, when to be there. But how did he even find the venue staff to question? I left the hall with more questions than answers. That evening, I kept my phone close, pretending to be busy with last-minute emails. Instead, I watched. Lila's phone buzzed more often than usual. She'd slip into another room, murmuring too quietly for me to catch. Each time she came back, her face was tighter, her explanations vaguer. That night, I checked her purse when she went to shower. I hated myself for doing it, but instinct overruled guilt. Tucked between makeup pouches and a half-folded napkin was a restaurant receipt. Not from anywhere we'd been together. A sleek bistro across town, one I knew was 5 blocks from Corey's apartment. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. Dated 3 weeks ago, the same weekend Lila had told me she was away with Vanessa at a bridal spa retreat. The receipt burned in my hand. I shoved it back, trying to keep my breathing steady. That was strike 2. Daniel called to check on me. He had been at my side during the rehearsal disaster and wanted to make sure I wasn't spiraling. I told him part of the truth, that I didn't buy Corey's entrance as random, that something wasn't adding up. He urged me to be careful, said emotions make people sloppy. I needed to play this smart if I wanted clarity. The following day, I shadowed Lila during the post-rehearsal brunch with her bridesmaids. I didn't confront her directly. Instead, I lingered outside the cafe, pretending to scroll my phone, watching their table through the glass. The laughter was forced. Vanessa leaned in, whispering something that made Lila's face pinch. Another bridesmaid, Nadia, looked uncomfortable, like she wanted to say something but held her tongue. When the group broke up, I trailed behind. I caught a fragment of Vanessa's voice, sharp, urgent, telling Lila she should have handled it better. That one line stayed with me. It wasn't surprise in her tone. It was scolding, like she had expected Corey's stunt and was mad about the execution. I started testing. That evening, I suggested changing some minor details, swapping the order of speeches at the reception, moving the rehearsal dinner to a different room. Just small tweaks. Within 24 hours, Corey appeared again. Not at the hall, but outside the florist shop where Lila had gone to finalize bouquets. He leaned against his car across the street, sunglasses on, too casual to be coincidence. This wasn't paranoia anymore. Someone was feeding him updates in real time. Later that night, when Lila slipped away to make another hushed call, I quietly followed her down the hall. Through the cracked door, I heard her whispering, her voice low but hurried. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard his name, Corey, and then something that froze me in place. Her saying, "I can't fix what happened at rehearsal. You shouldn't have done that." She wasn't denying it. She wasn't cutting him off. She was negotiating. When she came back, she acted normal, asking about cake flavors like nothing had happened. But I couldn't unhear it. My fiancée, the woman about to promise me forever, was still in contact with the man who had kissed her in front of everyone. At that point, the wedding wasn't just in jeopardy, it was unraveling before my eyes. But I still needed one thing before I made my move: undeniable proof. That night, I promised myself that if I had to, I'd burn the whole thing down, but not before I had everything I needed to expose the truth. The following days after the rehearsal felt like walking through smoke, where I could see shadows moving but never get a clear picture. I wasn't just a groom anymore. I was a man trying to survive inside a lie, pretending to move forward with wedding plans while secretly studying every detail like evidence at a crime scene. I couldn't afford an explosion yet. If I lashed out too early, everything would scatter and I'd never know the full truth. I needed to be deliberate. That was the only way to protect myself from being played for a fool in front of everyone again. I started with the smallest changes. One evening, while sitting at the kitchen table, I mentioned to Lila that I was thinking about moving the brunch with my relatives to a different restaurant. I spoke it casually, almost lazily, like it was nothing important. She barely reacted, nodded, and went back to her phone. I didn't write it down, didn't message anyone, didn't even tell my parents. The next morning, I drove by that restaurant. Corey was there. He was parked across the street leaning on his car, not even pretending to be invisible. When Lila's car pulled up a few minutes later, he straightened and looked directly at her as though they had arranged to meet. I drove past without stopping, heart hammering in my chest, knowing I had caught them in a pattern. This wasn't chance. He was being fed details, and the source was someone inside her circle. Once I saw that, I knew I couldn't just rely on instinct. I needed actual evidence, something undeniable. I roped Daniel into helping me. He didn't hesitate when I told him I wanted to trap them. He had seen enough at the rehearsal to hate Corey already, and his loyalty to me was absolute. The plan was simple. During one of the cake tasting sessions at the venue, when the bridesmaids and groomsmen were split into different waiting rooms, he would leave his phone recording in their lounge. It was risky, but worth it. Later that night, he slid the phone across the table to me with a grim face. I listened to the audio 3 times in a row, my pulse quickening with every pass. The voices were muffled but clear enough to follow. Vanessa, the maid of honor, was the loudest. She was angry, scolding Lila about losing control. She said something about how the timing had been wrong, that Corey should have waited until the actual ceremony if they wanted the message to stick. Another voice, one of the bridesmaids, whispered nervously that it was too much, that the whole thing was going to blow up. Then Vanessa snapped that it was already in motion, and they had to stick to it. I stopped breathing when I heard those words. They weren't shocked about Corey kissing her. They had been expecting something like it. They were planning it. I sat in my car after that, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles whitened. It wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestration. They had wanted me destabilized, humiliated in front of everyone. I didn't yet know the exact endgame, but I understood now that the kiss was not an impulsive move by an obsessed ex. It was act one of something larger, and my fiancé was right in the middle of it. As if fate wanted to confirm it further, I was approached the next evening by someone I never expected, Vanessa's boyfriend, Lucas. He caught me outside in the parking lot of a convenience store. His face was pale and tight, like someone who hadn't slept in days. He told me he couldn't stand watching me get blindsided anymore. He admitted he had overheard Vanessa one night when she thought he was asleep. She had been fighting with Lila on the phone. The words he caught were burned into his head. "If you want him gone, fine, but don't drag me into it." Lucas said he didn't know exactly what it meant, but combined with what had happened at rehearsal, he couldn't keep it to himself. He looked at me almost apologetically, like giving me the truth was a crime. I thanked him quietly, though inside my body was shaking with fury. I had enough to know I wasn't paranoid. They were maneuvering to get rid of me, one way or another. That night I sat at my desk and started assembling a timeline. I dug through everything. Receipts I had secretly pocketed, inconsistencies in her stories, the nights she claimed to be out with Vanessa but wasn't. I compared those against the times Corey had magically appeared in places he shouldn't have known about. The spa weekend she claimed she spent with the bridal party aligned perfectly with a receipt for wine and dinner at a bistro 5 blocks from Corey's apartment. The rehearsal kiss lined up with a sudden change in schedule that only a few people had known about. Each puzzle piece locked into another, and the picture got clearer. Lila hadn't accidentally reconnected with her ex. She had been maintaining it all along, carefully feeding him details while telling me he was ancient history. The most damning moment came late at night. Lila had gone to bed earlier than usual, exhausted from what she said was a long day of errands. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, screen lighting up in the dark. I didn't touch it, but the preview of the message was enough. The words were simple, devastating. "We can fix this. He won't do anything if he still wants the wedding." It was Corey. He wasn't speaking like a stalker. He was speaking like a partner. And the assumption underneath those words, that I was weak, that I would swallow my pride to save face. Ignited something in me I hadn't felt since this started. They thought I was trapped. They thought I would still marry her out of fear of humiliation, that I'd bury my suspicions to avoid a scandal. They were wrong. From that moment on, I stopped being a passive observer. I shifted into preparation. I wanted exposure, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been watching from the sidelines. If they wanted a public display, I was going to give them one, but on my terms. Instead of waiting for them to make the next move, I started drafting my own script. I booked a private dinner under the guise of a thank you celebration, inviting both families, the bridal party, and even the officiant. I told everyone it was to express gratitude before the big day. Lila was delighted at the idea, even kissed me on the cheek with that same face I had started to recognize as practiced, not genuine. She didn't know the dinner wasn't meant to celebrate. It was meant to expose. By then I had gathered receipts, recordings, testimonies, and timelines. Every single thread of deception was tied in my hands. I wasn't going to scream or throw things. I was going to calmly, methodically lay it all out where nobody could look away. On the surface, the days leading up to that dinner looked like any other wedding countdown. We went to fittings, checked flowers, confirmed with the photographer. To anyone watching, we were a happy couple. Inside, I was keeping my breathing steady, rehearsing in my head how to drop each piece of evidence at the right moment, how to make sure they couldn't wriggle free. Every time I looked at her, I reminded myself that she had already chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. By the time the dinner night arrived, I wasn't nervous anymore. I was focused. If Corey's kiss at the rehearsal was supposed to humiliate me, my dinner would destroy them both. The night of the dinner arrived like a storm I had been waiting to unleash. On the surface, it looked like a warm family gathering. Tables were set with wine glasses glinting under soft chandeliers, plates lined with appetizers, chatter flowing in waves. Everyone assumed this was just another pre-wedding event, a chance for relatives to toast and fuss over the couple before the ceremony. Only I knew the real purpose. I wasn't here to celebrate. I was here to end it. Lila was radiant that evening, dressed in a pale blue gown that made her look like the perfect bride-to-be. She floated from group to group, laughing too brightly, squeezing hands, performing the role of fiancée flawlessly. If you didn't know better, you would think she had nothing to hide. I watched her with a detachment that surprised me. Just days before, I would have been proud to stand beside her. Now I looked at her as someone I had already buried, a stranger walking around in a dress I had paid for. Corey wasn't invited, of course, but I knew he wouldn't be far. He never was. Every move I made in recent days had been shadowed by him, like he thought I didn't notice. I scanned the windows, the corners of the lot outside, and I wasn't wrong. His car was parked across the street, angled toward the entrance, engine off. He was waiting to be summoned like a backup dancer. He wouldn't be part of this dinner, but he would feel its echoes soon enough. I stood, cleared my throat, and tapped my glass gently. Conversations died down. Faces turned toward me, expectant, smiling. I began by thanking everyone for coming, keeping my voice calm and measured. I told them how grateful I was for their presence, for the support of two families joining together, for friends who had traveled long distances. It was the kind of opening they expected. But then I shifted. I said that tonight wasn't just about gratitude, it was about truth. And the truth, I said, was something many of them had been kept from. Lila's expression faltered immediately. She tilted her head, smile freezing in place, as if waiting for me to clarify. Vanessa's fork clinked against her plate. Daniel leaned back slowly, crossing his arms, knowing exactly what was coming. I pulled out the folder I had prepared. Inside were receipts, screenshots, a printed transcript of the audio recording, even a statement Lucas had signed. I placed it on the table with a quiet slap that sounded louder than it should have. I explained that while most people assumed Corey's appearance at the rehearsal was a random act, it hadn't been random at all. He had known the time and the place because someone in this room had told him. And the kiss he planted on Lila wasn't a desperate grab for attention. It was part of a plan. Gasps circled the table. Lila tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand to silence her. I wasn't going to let her steer this narrative again. I flipped open the folder and laid out the receipts first. A dinner for two at a bistro near Corey's apartment, dated the same weekend Lila claimed she had been on a spa retreat with her bridesmaids. A hotel invoice showing 2 rooms booked under her name, the second canceled at the last minute. I slid them across the table for her family to see. Her father's face drained of color. Her mother muttered her name under her breath. Next came the transcript from Daniel's recording. I didn't play the audio, it wasn't needed. I read aloud the line where Vanessa had snapped about Corey ruining the timing, and another bridesmaid whispering that this was going too far. The room shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa's face turned crimson, and she dropped her gaze to her lap. I told them this wasn't speculation. They had been planning it. They wanted me destabilized, humiliated, forced to either go through with the wedding on their terms or collapse under the weight of suspicion. Then I revealed the late-night call. I told them how I'd overheard Lila whispering Corey's name, scolding him for kissing her too soon. I explained the message I had seen light up her phone. "We can fix this. He won't do anything if he still wants the wedding." I told them Corey had been counting on my silence, on my pride, keeping me shackled to the ceremony. But I wasn't shackled anymore. Lila broke then. She leaned forward, face pale, voice rising as she tried to paint it all as a misunderstanding. She said Corey was obsessed, that she hadn't known he would show up. She said the receipts were for a closure dinner. She said anything she could to claw her way back to credibility. But it was too late. Every piece of evidence stacked against her, and each lie only made her sound more desperate. When Vanessa tried to defend her, Lucas finally spoke. He admitted what he had heard, how she had pressured him to stay quiet. That broke the last thread of denial. Her family turned on her immediately. Her father slammed his hand on the table, demanding to know if she had thrown away her future for the sake of an old flame. Her mother wept quietly, shaking her head. The bridesmaids avoided eye contact, shifting in their seats like they wanted to disappear. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by Lila's sputtering attempts to salvage what was already ashes. I waited for it to settle, then delivered the final blow. I announced that the wedding was canceled. Not postponed. Not reconsidered. Canceled. The contracts with the venue and vendors had already been terminated under clauses of deception. I had pulled her access from our joint accounts days earlier. There was nothing left to negotiate. She tried to scream that I couldn't just walk away, that she'd sue, that she'd ruin me publicly. But her threats were hollow, and everyone in that room knew it. And then, almost as if summoned by the collapse inside, Corey strode into the hall. He had been waiting, listening, probably expecting Lila to call him in as some triumphant reveal. Instead, he walked into a firing squad of glares. He tried to put his arm around her, to act like they were united, but she shoved him away. The plan had crumbled, and now she wanted distance. He barked something about me being pathetic, about how she loved him all along, but I cut him off by revealing one last piece. I told the room that I had already contacted his employer after finding out he had been abusing his position to manipulate schedules and travel records to meet with Lila. His company had opened an internal review. His smug grin flickered, then vanished. The cockiness drained out of him as he realized his safety net was gone. He left as abruptly as he had entered, slamming the door behind him. The room was chaos after that. Relatives whispered fiercely, some in sympathy toward me, others in shame at Lila. Vanessa slipped out without another word. Lucas followed, avoiding her gaze. Lila sat crumpled, makeup smudged, whispering weak excuses to no one in particular. I gathered my folder, straightened my jacket, and told everyone I appreciated their time. I walked out into the night with my head high, not a groom abandoned, but a man who had refused to be broken on someone else's terms. The days that followed were brutal for Lila. The venue and vendors sent invoices for breach of contract penalties, which fell squarely on her shoulders since I had documented the fraud. Her parents refused to cover them, disgusted by her choices. Friends who had once posted gushing engagement photos now whispered about her betrayal. Corey vanished from her side once his own career was on the line. By the end of the week, she was alone, saddled with debts, her reputation fractured. As for me, I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. I hadn't just dodged a bullet. I had walked out of the line of fire with my dignity intact. People said later they admired how I handled it, how I exposed the truth without lowering myself to a screaming match. But it wasn't about admiration. It was about survival. She wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone. Instead, she ended up standing alone in the wreckage while I walked away free. That was the real ending. Not revenge, not rage, but silence. Her world crumbled, and I never had to lift a finger again. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.